Welcome to another episode of The Happy Doctor. Now, today our episode is a little bit different in the sense that it's kind of a book review, but not really a book review. We do have the author of the book High Tea and Apricots with us, but it's more about a story that's all about loss, hope, healing, and how to prosper again. And I think I've chosen this specific episode for Women's Month just because I believe this whole journey can really touch so many people's lives. Not only women, so definitely I think men can get a lot from this discussion as well. So it is going to be sharing a real life journey with you and all the lessons learned from it. But I think secondly, we're also going to touch on how interconnected and interdependent all the different elements of well-being are. And I think that is a really important discussion as well. To introduce Kim to you, Kim Ballantine is the author of, like I mentioned, High Tea and Apricots. And I'm just going to show you, I hope you can see it a little bit. But Kim, welcome, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
Thank you so much, Renelle. It's such a privilege to be with you and to just share with your readers some of our journey.
Absolutely. Kim, I think maybe for the audience who don't know you or who haven't read your book, maybe you can just briefly share your story with us.
So I'm an industrial and a research psychologist. My husband had just finished specializing as an specialist physician. We had 3 children. Natalie was 9.5. The twins were 7. And it was my 40th birthday. And he asked me what I wanted for my birthday. And I said to him, I wanted breakfast in bed. I just wanted time with my husband. So he sent the kids to school, brought me breakfast in bed and a chef's apron and nothing else. And Renal, I started coughing and retching that day. I lost my ability to control sound. So it came out very staccatoed. And when I did speak, my vocal cords just went into spasm, this incredibly tight spasm that I couldn't breathe. And then I also just coughed and coughed and coughed. It felt like I'd swallowed boiling water. And I ended up passing out, had no idea what had happened, and was diagnosed then within a few weeks in and out of hospital, diagnosed with what they thought was spasmodic dysphonia. So it's your ability to phonate, to speak, had completely malfunctioned. So they thought that I, at that stage, had a form of Parkinson's. And it was just devastating. I remember standing in the lift and just writing on a paper to my husband, how long? Because the professor said to me, this is chronic. And he just said to me eventually, he said, Kim, chronic is forever. You'll never speak again. And the treatment was then Botox into the vocal cords. I used Botox in lots of other places, but Botox into the vocal cords so that they would be paralyzed so I could actually speak. I could actually breathe. Because speaking is one thing, or the loss of it. Not being able to breathe is completely different. Our kids had to learn to resuscitate me from very little. After that, when that no longer worked, I ended up with a tracheostomy, that hole here at the base of your throat where you can breathe. And that was the beginning of a very long journey. Later, ended up with cancer, septicemia, multiple organ failure a number of times. But through it all, I mean, you're hearing me speak. I remember writing on a piece of paper, you don't know how big my God is or how determined I am, and one day I will have a story to share. And I think that really is our story.
Yeah, now I think that is very, very brief, because if you read the book and also to take into account that this was kind of like over a number of years, it was not like the few minutes that Kim shared the story with now. And I think you really have to read the book because it is so raw and real. So I think whenever you go through any kind of a challenge, even though it might not be maybe in terms of illness or something, I think like you will just be able to resonate with so much of what Kim is sharing in a book. But I also want to ask Kim, I think if you are reflecting now, were there any warning signs or symptoms that in the years like in leading up to losing your voice?
So, Renelle, it's an interesting question. And I had to think long and hard about it. My husband was specializing over a period of 4 or 5 years. And so we'd been living in Valcom. I'd literally had my head in a nappy bucket because I had twins. And when he went on to specialize those last couple of years, I went back to consulting. So I literally went into full-on consulting, more like an industrial engineer with an industrial psychologist. So people flip houses. My job was to flip factories. So it was a stressful job, but I loved what I did. I really, really loved it. And so, was stress a component? I have no idea. We later discovered that this was, we thought this was completely neurological in its etiology. The whole journey process is almost a period of 15 years. So it's not just a short, 5 minutes or a year. It was a long process. So I can't specifically pinpoint anything that may have tipped the balance or necessarily led to it.
Okay, now that is definitely interesting because I think it also again like proves that point of you should living every day to the fullest because anything can just happen like in a blink of an eye. Something that severe can happen. So then I also want to just touch on, I think like we said we want to talk about the interconnectedness and the interdependence of the different elements of well-being throughout your journey. Now, even though yours were specifically, like in physical health or physical well-being related, but certainly it must have impacted you in so many other aspects of your life. So maybe you can
Absolutely.
just share with us and whether it is positive or negative. But in terms of spiritual well-being, how did you experience that?
So I think I'm a Christian. I love Jesus. I have a deep relationship with God. And so my spiritual is, who I am spiritually is so central to who I am in terms of my relationship with my children, my worldview. It's very strongly based in that. So this was an absolute skew ball. I never saw this coming, and my whole world completely and utterly imploded as I knew it. Mother of three, married, running a full-on business, and suddenly you are unable to speak. And in fact, if you try, you can't breathe. So it definitely, I think, firstly, my spirituality and my relationship with God was absolutely pivotal, A, in terms of me coping, and B, in terms of our family holding together, and then C, in terms of actually coming all through this all with the outcomes that we've had. So my spirituality and that was absolutely fundamental. Did I struggle spiritually? Absolutely. When you go through such significant loss, when the world that you've known completely shifts on its axis within a day, it's going to have you questioning. But I think I got to a point of realizing that I could get stuck in the why. Why did this happen? Why me? Does God allow these things? Doesn't he? Why would it be me with all these little children? I eventually got to the point of saying, I will never, ever know the why. And if I hold on to that why, God's not intimidated by my why. He's not intimidated by my anger, my hurt, my upset. But if I was going to sit with that why, it potentially could lead to victimhood and definitely bitterness. and resentment. And so I remember definitively making a choice of saying, God, I don't understand the why, but I do know who the author and the finisher of my faith is, and that is you. And so I actually choose to trust you, whatever the outcome is. And so that was pivotal for me, definitely from a spiritual perspective. And then, as I said, just my relationship with God was completely fundamental in being able to cope.
Okay, now that is good to know. And then also about physical well-being, because apart from being ill and suddenly you can no longer speak and struggling to breathe, what about things like exercising, sleep, nutrition? How did it impact on those kind of elements?
So it was huge. I weighed, normally I weigh about 55 kilograms. I was very athletic. Rob and I used to do the Argus. We did cycle races. We hiked. We are a very athletic family, or very involved family. Always been careful about diet and sugars and refined carbohydrates and those kind of things. So we'd been acutely aware, about the importance of that, and getting sleep and drinking your water and all of those things. But when I got ill, they injected Botox into my vocal cords. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't swallow. And so everything had to be pureed. Absolutely everything was pureed. And that included, if we went out for a steak and a baked potato or salad or something, what are you going to do with that? So I literally would have to take a little blender with me, a stick blender, and go and put a cup of boiling water with that and blend it. So everything was then blended. We didn't have NutriBullets at that point, or as much as we know now about nutrition in your green smoothies and all of those kind of things. But I lost an incredible amount of weight. I weighed 43 kilograms on any given day. So you can imagine the impact that has. Any hot air, dry air, dust, solvents, fatty, like going into a restaurant and there's a fattiness in the air, it would just start me coughing and coughing and coughing till I broke ribs. And so exercise was off the cards. I couldn't exercise. The drugs I was on a lot of anti-epileptics because they thought there was a component of Parkinson's and possibly epilepsy with it. So those impacted my short-term memory. It impacted my ability just to cope physically. So it was severely challenging from a physical point of view. And I think food is a social thing. We connect around food and meals, and it's wonderful. Food was it was hard. Meal times were exceptionally stressful. Rob was working in ICUs and running patients on the wards, so he was often not there for a meal. If I choked, it meant my kids Heimlich maneuvering. If I couldn't breathe again, they'd have to get a thing in to inject lignocaine onto my vocal cords. So things that were just beautiful and pleasurable just were not anymore. And so it definitely impacted me massively from a physical point of view. And I think like a lot of people, I metabolize stress with a run or a cycle. And now what do? Some days you can't even get down the drive. So that was very significant.
Yeah, and I think even if you think about something as simple, we also used to say to anybody that we meet or to a friend or a family member, let's quickly meet for coffee. But I mean, even something as simple and as ordinary as that was like in a big challenge for you.
It was a massive challenge because I had to drink through a straw. And 80-90% of the time I would choke. So I lost a lot of friends, but I had other, because people don't know what to do. I mean, I was technically disabled. I had to learn sign language to communicate with my family. But there were other people that just came along that were absolutely unbelievable from quarters I never expected. And there was a group of women, they called themselves the Mad Cows. I was lifelong chairman. You'll read about it in the book. But the amazing thing was, A, they never felt sorry for me. And B, they just said, well, we meet every week, whether you are up to it or not. And if we were sitting in a restaurant having coffee, they would call, whoever was waitering, and they'd say, please bring the pig slop bucket because she will choke and there will be a mess. And we just, so it was just, they treated me completely normally.
Mm.
And you need people like that in your life. You really do. But it did impact social interactions very significantly.
Yeah, and I think then if we touch on intellectual well-being, and I think you referred a number of times throughout the book to certain situations where people kind of like in really being like really rude to you and almost kind of, like treat you as if intellectually there's something really wrong with you also. So just share with us a little bit about intellectual well-being.
So I didn't realize how much it meant to me. I love research. I'd had so many publications. So I'd been given an honorary master's in research psychology. I was an industrial psychologist as well, loved to publish, had worked for the Human Sciences Research Council, ran one of the departments. So I love cognitive stimulation. And it's very interesting when you can't speak, when you are differently abled, when you sign language dependent and you're signing away, people assume you're deaf. And I mean, I literally had people say to me, get out, we don't serve deaf idiots here. Or say, get out, we're not dealing with a beggar today. It
Mm.
was absolutely, it was intriguing. Or someone would grab my credit card and say, can I help you with that? I'm like, what on earth, So it was very challenging. And then I think I alluded to the fact on a lot of the medication, it affected my short-term memory. So that was extremely, extremely difficult for me because I'd always had a very good memory. So one of the things we did was to literally use visual management. I'd used visual management in the factories I dealt with where everything was visual. You could see charts and graphs. We literally had to turn our home into a visual management site just so that we could cope and that I would remember. So things on my phone, things on the wall, things on the fridge, because if I couldn't see it, I wouldn't remember it.
Mm.
So where a lot of my strength, I guess, had been in the cognitive side, it was incredible to doubt yourself so much and just feel like so much of what was familiar just imploded around you.
Yeah, and I think then again, the good thing coming out of this from an intellectual well-being point of view, if you cannot speak, then you have to convert to writing. And I think you mentioned to me before we started recording that you actually your book is based on the things that you've written down during that period. So I think that was again something really positive coming from all
Absolutely.
of this.
So, absolutely. So, I think Rob was not at the sign language classes. Right from the get go, I knew that I had to find a way to communicate with my children and my husband. Otherwise, I mean, what a mess you can imagine. And so, we needed a sign language tutor. And Rob was not able to be there and he couldn't lip read. So it felt like with every hand sign that we were learning and learning quickly, within 6 months, we were pretty fluent. He and I were just getting further and further apart. And so I started writing. I would capture moments in a day. I would just write furiously. I'd write, the day I was kicked out of trying to post a letter, kicked out. How do you process that? And I wanted him to understand. So I wrote everything down as though he were watching and looking in. And so that became the basis for the book, because how you can't look back 15 years later, 20
Mhm.
years later and recall those kind of things. It's impossible. So that was the incredible gift in in this whole process cognitively, was being
Mm.
able to find a voice in a very different medium.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I must say, like in the book is very, very well written. It really feels like you are part of the journey while reading it. So, I would definitely recommend to anybody reading it. But then you have touched a little bit now on your family. But if we think about relational well-being in terms of
Yeah.
your relationship with your family as well as your broader friends, and so just share with us more about that.
So relationship well-being is so key to how we cope, isn't it? It's
Mm.
part of relationship well-being is your ability to communicate. And so when that very thing is taken away from you, you the seen person who's just not seen. You know, you're there in a room, but you're silent. People don't know what to do with you. So socially difficult. People look at your eyes when you communicate. They don't look at your mouth. And so I went to WITS, to their speech clinic, not because I needed to learn to speak, I couldn't, but learn to articulate so that people could lip read me much easier, and then get people to look at my mouth, not my eyes. So that was a huge thing. Some people panic completely. Other people are very gracious. And so that was difficult in terms of relationship, maintaining relationship. People, some people just couldn't cope. And that's fine. They had other things maybe that were challenging and they couldn't cope with the enormity of what we were dealing with. From a marriage point of view, it was extremely tough. We are communicators. Rob and I have always, our connection, our intimacy has been built around communication. And suddenly, the very thing that had connected us so strongly, our spirituality and our communication, was so under threat. And that was really, really tough for us. And I think specifically for him, because he would often come in late after a call or during a call, he would talk, he would process. And then obviously I want to talk back. But if I tried at all to speak, I coughed, I retched, my vocal cords went into spasm. And so he just withdrew even more. And it put our relationship under massive strain. And I think with the children too, how do you communicate? And you've got to find other mechanisms. And so relationally, we found we took paper plates to put faces on, like emojis, so that the kids could show me what they were feeling that day, where they were at, what was happening inside of them. And I remember about 6 months in, Natalie said to me, Mom, I feel more loved now by a mommy with no voice than I ever felt with it by a mommy with a voice. And the reason was I couldn't shout down a passage. I had to look in her eyes. I had to touch her. I had to be present. We had eye contact and we were in close proximity. And I realized then that children are completely behaviorally oriented. We are vocally oriented. You and I can say, I love you, and you get it. Children don't when you say, I love you. They need to feel it, touch it, experience it. And so a huge amount was conveyed in terms of relational connection with them in the space of no voice and disability. So it was a very relational connection there was a huge gift in it. We became extremely intentional about our connection because we knew that if we didn't manage our connection as a couple and as a family, we would be shipwrecked. So relationally, hugely under fire, but also a gift that came out of it. One of the huge gifts was 2 years in. Rob and I ended up at Monte Casino having coffee. I choked all over him. And I was no longer the woman he'd married. He wasn't the husband I'd married anymore. We were like strangers to each other. We loved each other, but life had thrown us the most massive curveball. He couldn't fix me as a specialist in disease. And I was looking at a man who was longing for a woman who was never going to come back short of a complete miracle. So in some ways, it might have been easier for us to go our separate ways. But we literally sat there and we said, we're not going to walk away from our faith. We're going to honor this relationship. We're going to be very intentional about our emotional connection, being open and honest with the children, managing ourselves, etc. And so we made very definitive choices, which I honestly think is what saved our relationship as well. You know, choice is the last of the human freedoms. I mean, Viktor Frankl talks about that. And between stimulus and response, there is a choice, and you get to choose what you put in that gap, you know.
Yeah.
So that was a massive lesson for us.
Yeah, and I think what was also fascinating to me reading the book is to also appreciate how differently, kind of like in each of your children and Rob as your husband, how everybody kind of experienced it differently and coped with it differently. And I think that again just emphasized the importance that you should never kind of force somebody how they must feel or how they must cope, or you're not try to you know, kind of speed things up. You must really allow each person to deal with that loss and all the emotions around it. So I think that that is also a brilliant lesson coming through in the book. But I think on that point, what about emotional well-being? Because I can just imagine, I think even for somebody who is maybe a big introvert or who doesn't like to talk a lot, if you know, but you still have the choice to talk, and suddenly kind of like in there's just nothing, you no longer have that ability. So I can just imagine in terms of frustration and anger and all the emotions that you had to deal with.
So I think the emotional well-being was it was a hard one, because your typical copes were no longer there. I couldn't go running, I couldn't go hiking, I couldn't cycle on a bicycle. I couldn't go to, you know, what do you do sitting with a therapist where they can't understand you? Eventually, I did go. I went and sat with someone. I typed her an email. Sent it to her, and she took me to a sandpit, and with a wet sand. And she just said, "Here's a dry sandpit. Here's a wet one. You do your thing. I'll come back in an hour." And it was just the most therapeutic process, just playing in sand and depicting what was going on inside. So I'm so grateful there were people that were prepared to step in, you know, and to reach into that space. But in terms of emotionally, there's such a tension between I want to be brave, I want to woman up and do this well, versus how do I be vulnerable? How do I share the depths of what I'm going through, my fear, my not knowing if I'm going to wake up in the tomorrow morning. Certainly when I had cancer, I had 3 lots of neutropenic sepsis impacting my organs, potentially going to organ failure. I mean, they were really hard things. And so how do you maintain your positivity, but how are you real about what you're going through? Where's the balance between that? And so it was a tough one. And how do you keep in touch with your children's emotional well-being, where you're saying each of them responded differently? Each of them hit fight, flight, or freeze completely differently. And how do you help them get unstuck? You know, so it was a massive challenge, but it had us on our knees, just saying, God, you've got to give us tools. We've got to find tools and there's no manual that comes with this. And I think one of the things that Rob and I, that we really tapped into was, we called it the 5-minute rule. I didn't know about Nancy Klein or generative thinking or any of these things that have come along now. But I would literally say to him, I need 5. And he would just say, right, where you at? What's going on? And I would type, or I would write, or later when he was sign language fluent, he could understand me. And I had 5 minutes to unpack it, to go to the depth of whatever I was feeling. And then we closed it off. And he had time to go where he needed to. There was no judgment, no answering back, no fixing, nothing. It was just being curious about where that person was at. And then afterwards, just really affirming and appreciating each other. And bookending those conversations allowed us to go where we needed to in the heart. We did it with our children. We were very open with them. Natalie once said to us, no information could be worse than our imaginations, don't hide anything from us.
Mm.
And so you can imagine a child that has this free floating anxiety where their thoughts are going to go. And so we were very honest, obviously, with what they could handle, but we had to deal with that emotional component and face it. I think one of the hardest conversations we ever had was, I didn't know if I was going to make it. And Ashley, the littlest of the twins, she actually said, "Is mommy going to die?" And Rob just said to her, "Ashley, yes, mommy will die at some stage. You will, so will I. But whether it will be now or not, I don't know. But we have to trust that God is walking our road with us, and he's also walking mommy's road with her." And then I signed. I said, if mommy's no longer here, daddy can love another mommy. And so can you. I mean, I'm wanting to give them permission, but I tell you, that night I signed to him, if she has long blonde hair and swimming in a D cup with blue eyes, I kan hom spook. There's no way, you know. But it allowed us to have those very real, very raw conversations and be open and vulnerable emotionally.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's actually sad to think that sometimes something that severe must happen to us before we get to the point of doing these things, while these things should actually be part of our
100%.
daily lives. But I think like in for us who haven't been through those kind of things, that is not something that we often focus on or give any attention to.
Absolutely. So I think because communication was so difficult and emotional connection was so hard, we became so intentional. At supper, I would sign what was your high, what was your low, what was the best part of your day, what was the hardest. And the kids could talk about that. They were fighting with each other at a period. And so we would say, right, you come to the dinner table with something you appreciate about everybody there. We didn't know what appreciation does in terms of oxytocin and bonding and things like that. We just were desperate for tools. We talked about having a head man and a heart man, and how your head man can go into such negative spaces, but so can your heart man. And how do you manage that, you know? And so we pushed the boundaries in terms of parenting, you know, in terms of looking for tools, because we wanted connection with these little people. We wanted them to have a language in terms of what they were going through. Did we always get it right? Not a chance. But we were happy to get therapists involved, to get other people involved, you know, and to then at times when I was really ill, very tough thing I did was to find 3 other people that we really valued to say, can you step in and help with Natalie? Can you be her go-to? Can you be Ashley's go-to? Can you meet her at school in the mornings and just love on our girl, check in on her? Can you check in on Ryan? And that was tough because you so want to hold that role as mom, which is key. But there were times we had to actually ask people to come in and step in and mentor. And family was absolutely, our family was my extended family, my brothers and their wives and my dad, just so key to that emotional connection within our family.
Yeah, and I think like if you read the book, there's really so many brilliant tools that you are sharing in there, and I think like in anybody can really take a lot from it. Like in if you are going through whatever kind of challenge or difficult period, but then also what about financial well-being?
So just before we move on to that, just in terms of the tools, like you said earlier, these are the kind of things we should be doing all the time.
Mm,
You know, don't wait for the heart to put them in place. Really don't. And I think emotionally, just the last thing I want to say, and it links with cognitively and spiritually, because there's such an interconnection, was that just watching one's attitude. And we worry so much cognitively. You go down rabbit holes and negative thinking. I mean, we talk about what 80% of our thinking is repetitive, 90% is negative, or whatever the stats are. So just saying to myself, I will have a gratitude journal. I will be committing to 1,000 things I'm grateful for. because emotionally I did get depressed 3 times. I really hit a bad depression, but I put myself on that gratitude journey. And Foscamp talks about 1,000 gifts. And I just said, you won't hit 1,000, you won't stop till 1,000. And I've never got to 500 without feeling that shift. So gratitude doesn't change what you see, but it changes how you see things. And so that was a massive interconnection for me. But then in terms of financial well-being, well, we lost a primary breadwinner overnight. I was earning more than Rob at that time because he was still, he had just finished specializing and he was starting up his practice, and that was gone. So huge, huge issue. But I thank God for the fact that we had a financial advisor. He had come to see me in the November, and I lost my voice in the February. And he said to me, Kim, you're earning well at the moment, and you are the primary one here. You don't have any disability insurance. And I said, man, don't talk rubbish with me. Look at me. Look how healthy I am. What do you mean disability insurance? You're talking nonsense, And he left the forms. He said, I'm not leaving Joburg without you signing those. And I still gave him a hard time. And then he came and he said, you need to sign these. And I signed them. There was one thing that they wanted an exclusion on. I'd broken a finger or something ridiculous. And that kicked in on the 1st of February and on the 19th of February. 14th, I started coughing. The 19th, I had no voice. And so the fact that I had disability insurance for own income generation, I cannot tell you how grateful. So the amazing thing was that I then had income coming in. And a lot of our medical bills were not covered by medical aid. They're not going to pay for Botox to your vocal cords to paralyze them. So there were lots of unexpected expenses that were crippling. And because I had income protection insurance, we were actually able to do those. So financial well-being was huge. Can you imagine the stress that I would have been under and felt had we not had that kind of thing? I think we always have budgeted, we've always been careful, we've always invested in those kind of things. But this was different. Actually having an insurance that covered me, I was so unbelievably grateful. You think I just thought it will never happen to me. What? He's wasting my time. I could not have been more wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that is a critical lesson and a valuable lesson. And I think like you mentioned, this is something different from investing and creating wealth. So this is really kind of like in how do you protect your income and that during difficult times as well. Kim, then I want to ask you, there were really like an endless challenges throughout your journey. And I think we are mostly focusing on your voice loss, but I mean, there was also the breast cancer, which is also a huge challenge on its own. But what would you say throughout this journey, what was your biggest challenge?
Wow. That is such a difficult one. I think the breast cancer was extremely difficult. I squeeze from my core to predict, and sometimes I don't get it right. The breast cancer was very challenging because I got neutropenic sepsis, I got multiple organ failure. There were times I didn't think I was going to walk out of that. And I remember one particular incident, Rob just saying, you can go. You really can go. We will be fine without you. We're okay. And then he said to me, but before you make that decision, you've always been able to choose life. You've always been able to imagine, cycling on your bike or climbing the mountain with God or whatever. Can you do that now? And there was nothing. I was completely gutted, and then he just said to me, Kim, imagine your first grandbaby. Can you smell this little one? Can you nibble its toes? Can you look in its eyes? Because I know you would do that. And that night, just saying, I choose life. I choose life. I choose life. And so I think the chemo was extremely hard because I think I came off such a low base. You thin, incredibly thin anyway. There's no reserves. They don't adjust your chemo weight for your weight, or they didn't then. And so the chemo was extremely difficult. And then it took me at least 2 years to recover post chemo. So I think that was one of the hardest things. It's either that or obviously communication, massively, massively difficult. But we've talked a lot about that.
Mm. Yeah, I cannot even, I think, like in begin to imagine kind of like in how hard it must have been. But I just want to come back where you refer to like in thinking about your first grandchild. And I know like in throughout the book you often refer to that kind of like in you had this deep desire to become a gogo one day. And yeah, I think that they've definitely must have been like something quite strong and helping you kind of like in through all of those really, really bad patches. But how important do you think it is to still have hope and to have like in a sense of meaning through such periods?
Well, I think Viktor Frankl again writes a lot about that in Man's Search for Meaning. But we used to quote the Shawshank Redemption. I used to sign to my children, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and all good things never die. I think they thought it was a Bible verse. But I think hope is such, it is critical. Scripture says people without hope perish, people without vision perish. And so hope really has to do with vision, having a vision beyond the now, the discomfort of the now. And for me, that was absolutely critical, being able to have that. Because if you don't have hope, there is no meaning in what you're doing. And so for me, that was really critical. I think as a Christian, my hope was also in terms of God and in eternity. If I never saw the breakthrough here, that there would be a breakthrough for me in eternity. And I think that kind of hope is also absolutely critical. I don't know how people do this without a deep faith in Christ. Certainly for me, that is where my hope lay. But hope gives meaning to what you're doing. It gives meaning to getting up the next day. It gives meaning to actually making sure you get that food down and that it stays down, when you are so nauseous. Hope means you're going to shuffle. I mean, I remember being in isolation, in the hospital, and just at one point just realizing people had died overnight in the oncology ward. In fact, I was in a side room. I wasn't in isolation. And I remember unplugging my machines, and there were 4 shuffles in a meter. I know, I've measured out 4 shuffles in a meter. And it took me a full 24 hours to walk, not even a kilometer. But I shuffled because I knew that was one thing nobody else was doing in that oncology ward, was moving. And my hope was in actually getting out of there. And so I think when you have a hope, you start aligning your emotions and your behavior with that. I think hope is so interconnected with all of the modalities you've talked about. It's really key.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think then another thing that was also interesting for me reading the book, you you touch a lot on humor and having fun. And I think the way you wrote the book, it's also you often kind of laugh at something that you are writing, not because it is really funny, but just the way you are or how you have written it. But also in terms of fun and laughter and humor, how important or kind of like an effective coping mechanism was that for you and your family?
So I think absolutely, I mean, it's the old adage, is the glass half full or half empty? And, why can't it be overflowing? And so I think humor it's like gratitude. It doesn't change what you're seeing, it changes how you see things. And I think my children were very young. Natalie once said, she said, most children take the stairs through childhood. I took the lift. And so I was desperate for them to still have aspects of childhood, which is laughter, it's chuckle bellies, it's, playing nonsense when you can. And I remember one time choking really badly at the table. The kids were terrified. And then making some bit of humor out of it at the end. And Ryan just looking at me and just saying, Mom, I didn't know you could still be funny when you're so sick. And so I think it was, for me, it was, what are they going to remember? If I don't make this, what are they going to remember? A depressed, completely involuted mom, or one who's still grabbing life fully, And so for me, humor was so, so key to us coping. I actually asked Natalie, before she's here this evening, and I just said to her, Nats, how important was humor in all of this? She said, Mom, it was so central. And I think even now, we enjoy humor, and it's what a lot of the memories the kids have will be around the fun and the nonsense as well.
Yeah, and I think
so
that
it's very important.
Yeah, and I think that is also very selfless in the sense that you are not only thinking about yourself, but you're also trying to make it easier for everybody around you, which is, I think, also very, very profound. But I think on that, there are so many profound lessons throughout your journey and just by reading the book. But something that really stood out to me, and I want to quote it, towards the end, you said, can you love the healer more than the healing? He asks. So that to me was like, if I'm going to remember one thing about the book, I think it would be that sentence. So just talk to us through that specifically.
So it was an interesting moment. I was just sitting in my room reading scripture. I can tell you every healing scripture in the Bible, just about. I knew it off by heart. And I was just worshiping God in silence. I mean, I couldn't speak. And I felt God saying to me, can you love the healer more than you are loving the healing? And I was like, what on earth is that? And then I just felt God saying, Kim, can you trust me? Can you trust me? Can you love me above everything? And I realized that my spirituality and my faith was so transactional. It was almost like treating God like a vending machine. If I spend time in the Word, do this, do that, He will heal me. It was like transactional. It was like going through a grief cycle and sticking in the bargaining phase. And so it took me, I'm so embarrassed now, but it took me almost 6 weeks to eventually come back to that place on the floor and just say, God, I repent, and I choose to love you regardless of outcome, regardless of anything. I just choose to love you, not for what you give, not nothing, just for you, and that was huge for me. That was such a huge turning point. For me, it was a point of massive, in psychology, they talk about surrender. And I think for me, that was a place of huge surrender and brutal vulnerability about who I was. And it took courage. It really took courage of saying, regardless of outcome, let go. I mean, I can't determine outcome anyway, but I surrender. I really surrender it.
Yeah, no, I think that is so powerful, not only when you are going through something difficult, but I think a lot of us, we tend to kind of like in pray for the outcome and or what's the best outcome going to be. So I think this is really yeah, I must say, like in that I really resonated with that, and I think that we can really just learn a lot from that specific sentence just for our everyday lives as well. But then also you also ask two questions right at the end of the book. And I think this was also to me really, really special, where you said, what if our journey was never about us? What if it was for those who would be encouraged and challenged to hope despite the odds? And I think like, yeah, that is just also to me so special in terms of you've been through all of this, but yeah, now you can come to this kind of conclusion. So how did these questions basically change the way you and your family are living your lives today?
So it's an interesting quote that you picked up on. I think at the time you don't think about that. You're just in survival a lot of the time. You're just trying to get through it. I think when we began to share our story and it began to resonate with so many people, brought hope. It was an interesting moment of just saying, wow, what if this was, we went through this. It was tough. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but so many have been able to benefit. It's encouraged so many other people not to give up, not to give up hope. And as I said, I'm not saying we did it right or anything. And it almost sounds arrogant when I hear you reading that back to me. But I think our hope, the book's title is so interesting. It's Hot Tea and Apricots. And there's a whole reason behind that. But it was really one of the men that I used to consult to. We were having coffee together. I choked all over him. He would meet me every single month. He treated me like I still had a brain. It was wonderful. And I signed to him. I said, why do you do this? I don't understand why. I wrote why. And he was so polite. He just took a picture out of his briefcase. He said, this is Mount Elbrus. It's one of the 7 peaks. And he said, I was climbing from the Russian side. And when I got to this point, I knew I would never summit. And he said, but my Sherpa stopped and he gave me hot tea and apricots. And because of that, I summited. And maybe that's all I'm doing for you is hot tea and apricots. And one day you'll summit, you're going to make it. Mm. And there's no way you can do a journey like ours without lots of people being the hot tea and apricots, helping with the children, getting you back and forth to chemo, doing all of those kind of things. And the hope is that it would be that to other people. So I think maybe that's what I was really trying to capture. And I think also a lot of healing happens when you can find meaning in what you've gone through. Mm. When there's meaning beyond the trauma and the pain, I think an amazing amount of healing does happen. So I think the hope is, we've had people in their 90s, we've had teenagers, we've had men, we've had women just say, wow, this was so encouraging. So the audience is not specific who's responded. And people have responded to different things. And for me, that's so wonderful. It's just you'll respond to something, somebody else will respond to something different. And I'm so grateful that we are seeing the fruit of the hard, we are seeing in a very different way now. And I'm just incredibly grateful. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it also reminds me about when they always say we tend to ask why me, while you should rather ask why not me. And I think this to me is also it's almost just kind of a revelation that it's actually about something much bigger than just you and your family. I mean, like in here, God actually used you to kind of like make an impact that is so much bigger than what you probably would have made if it wasn't for all of these things happening to your family. So I think it just speaks to me kind of to something much bigger, and kind of like in how God uses each of us in a certain way to kind of glorify him and to be a messenger about hope and faith and just God in general.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're the weird family that kind of has a mission statement, and one of the things that we long for is that our lives would really glorify Jesus, that it would glorify God. I remember one man contacted me. He had had a tumor removed from his brain. It was benign, but as a result, he went colorblind, and he completely lost his ability to recognize for facial recognition. So every single person looked like a dummy, looked like a mannequin in a shop. He couldn't recognize his children's faces, his wife. He couldn't recognize his own. That facial recognition part of his brain was gone. And he was so incredibly, incredibly depressed. And his wife got the book, and two people mailed it to him. It arrived on the same day. He had 3 copies in his house. So he decided, well, God's got my attention. I better read this. And he messaged me. He said, wrong title. It should have been Hot Tears and Apricots. He said, I just cried the whole way through because he was now sitting with a significant disability. And he said, I realized that I was focusing so much on getting my sight back that I was no longer seeing what was in front of me. Mm-hmm. And it was just, I still have contact with him. It's amazing. It's catapulted him out of his depression. He's living life so differently. And, if it was just for him, it's amazing, Mm-hmm. So I think we get very humbled when you hear things like that, or people that have benefited or have, been challenged in their own journey. I'm just grateful. I'm very humbled and very grateful.
Mm. Good, Kim. I think we have just touched on a couple of things throughout your journey. So there's obviously so much more to it. But I think just if you can, as the last question, what would your message be to people listening or watching this who are maybe facing loss or facing challenges? But we still need hope and we would love to be healed and we would eventually want to prosper again. What would be your message?
You ask hard questions, eh? It's a big, very broad question. I just this year found myself using the acronym STAND, STAND, a lot because people say, how on earth did you keep standing? So I've really thought about it. And I would summarize the whole talk into that acronym, STAND, this time that you and I have had, because we've looked at all of this interconnectedness. So when trauma hits, whatever it is, financial, emotional, spiritual, behavioral, whatever, it's tough to keep standing. And so I use the S. I say, stay strong in relationship with God, because it's so easy to get stuck on the why and to walk away or blame. But it's a choice to stay, to sit at his feet, stay in his word, stand on what he's promised, and to be faithful to that. So S is that really staying strong in your spirituality. The T is counterintuitive. It's you feel so out of control when trauma hits. But the T is really about taking control of what you think, taking control of who you allow in your space, because people's voices matter. The voices we allow into our space matter. They're going to impact us negatively or positively. And then taking control of relationships. There's so much you can do to stay connected as a family, to stay connected with society. It's that whole thing about taking control where you can. The A is around attitude. And for us, we've practiced gratitude. We've seen the benefit of it. We've seen that it doesn't change what you see, it changes how you see things. And it's because you've got that reticular activating complex. If you're a Land Rover lover like me, you'll see all the Land Rovers on the road. If you're a Toyota driver like you might be, you don't even look at the Land Rovers twice, except to think how you're going to pull them out of the mud or when they break down. But what you focus on is what your brain increasingly tunes into. So that attitude is so critical. And then the N is around never negating the trauma of what you're going through. Don't negate it. Don't ignore it. Get the help you need, whether that's from pastoral counseling or your church or through psychologists or whoever is going to help. Don't shy away from actually getting help. It's so critical. And then the D is just around dreaming, daring to have hope, daring to dream beyond the now. I had vision boards. I would put up pictures of just hands holding a baby. I'd put up pictures of speaking in front of people, someone lecturing or speaking in front of people. It was an impossibility. It was not even it was like never going to happen. But it was about just saying, God, I choose to dream. What are your dreams for me? I choose to dream. And so I would just say that acronym, STAND, they're just some hope handles in there that I think are just nuggets. And don't leave it till your back's against the wall, or the pawpaw hits the fan and Eskom is on that day. So just rather start doing those things long before, because they just anchor us, don't they? But for me, I mean, the big one is never give up hope, and just stay in relationship with God. We would never have done this as a family without our relationship with God.
No, absolutely, Kim. And I think what a beautiful message to end with. And I like that, dare to dream. And just going back to your kind of desire in terms of you wanted to be a go-go, and that is what kind of like in sometimes kept you going. You are a go-go now, correct?
I'm a go-go of 4, and it's just beautiful. My one little grandchild told me the other day, Goxie or Gogo, when he's very affectionate, he calls me Goxie, but he said, Goxie, I love you more than a T-Rex loves meat. That's very big love. So I've got to just experience this incredible gift of being a gogo, and I remember I had cataracts removed from my eyes, and I remember looking in the mirror and seeing my wrinkles and going, my gosh, when did I get so old? What happened here? And there was this, just God arrested me and he said, Kim, you were almost a wrinkle-free corpse. What do you want? And I'm like, bring it on. I'm happy with the gray hairs and I'm happy with the wrinkles, because it just speaks legacy. It speaks life. It speaks of the privilege of being here. So many people don't make it, to being a gogo. And I'm just so, so incredibly grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim, I think I really want to thank you for sharing your journey, sharing all the challenges, but also the tools that you have put in a place. And I think just by reading your book, and we're going to share kind of like where you can buy Kim's book. I would really recommend that, because I think this is, even if you are not going through a difficult time now, I think there's just so much gold in there that you can really learn from. And yeah, Kim, so thank you for sharing your journey with us, the lessons learned. And I really want to wish you well. May there still be many healthy years, many happy years. May you really enjoy every second of your life being a gogo. And then, yeah, I just want to also say to the audience, I really hope that this added value and that you could really just maybe find something that you can take into your personal life, and it can help you to deal with loss or challenges that you are maybe facing, and to just give you some hope again, and to know that it is possible to heal through ever what kind of challenge you have faced or you are facing currently, and that you can prosper again. So I really hope the message came through tonight to really help you, put you back on a journey of hope and prosperous kind of living. So thank you so much, Kim. We really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Renelle, and it would be so lovely to hear from your listeners, and to hear what resonated with them out of today's podcast. So thank you for having me on your show.
Perfect. Thank you, Kim. Keep well.